Revenge office stories. The doctors told me my daughter might never walk again. And the people who did this to her? The son of a powerful CEO and his father, they figured a payoff would make it all go away. They thought a check with a few zeros on it was the price for my daughter's future, the price for my silence. They thought their money and influence put them in a different class of human, a class that doesn't have to answer for the pain they cause. They honestly thought they were untouchable. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw a grieving father. They didn't see the man who would burn their entire world to the ground to get justice for his little girl. Before the screech of tires and the flashing lights, our world was simple, quiet, a world that spun around my daughter, Sarah. She was 14, with a galaxy of freckles across her nose and a laugh that could talk the sun out from behind the clouds. Her life was a beautiful mess of scraped knees, half-finished paintings, and dreams just starting to take shape. She wanted to be a marine biologist. Our garage was basically a museum of seashells and weird rocks, and each one had a story she was dying to tell you. I'm a veteran. I spent 10 years in the service, and it teaches you a certain way of looking at the world. It teaches you about order, discipline, and the clear line between right and wrong. When I came home, all I wanted was a life that was the total opposite of all that conflict. I just wanted peace. I wanted to watch my daughter grow up, help her with her homework, teach her how to drive, and see her off to prom. My life wasn't about missions and objectives anymore. My life was about her. Our evenings were our sanctuary. We had this ritual. I'd cook dinner, usually something she'd complain about just for fun, and she'd tell me about her day. All the drama with her friends, the test she aced in biology, the new stray cat she was trying to win over. Those moments, they were the foundation of my world. Simple, predictable, and they were everything. I remember the day before it happened with a clarity that's almost painful now. We were in the backyard, and she was trying to teach me some dance she learned from a video. I was so clumsy, all knees and elbows, and she was laughing so hard she had to sit down on the grass, holding her stomach. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright with that pure, uncomplicated joy that only a kid can have. That's the image burned into my mind. That's the before. The perfect, fragile world that was about to be shattered by the carelessness and arrogance of a boy who'd never been told no in his life. A world shattered by a father who believed his money could rewrite reality. They had no idea what they were taking from us. Not just her ability to walk, but that laughter, that simple peace. And for that, there wasn't enough money in the world to make me go away. It was a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary, forgettable Tuesday. The sky was a bland, washed-out blue. Sarah had called me to pick her up from her friend's house, just a few blocks away. I was pulling up to the corner when I saw her. She was on the crosswalk, her green backpack slung over one shoulder, waving at me with this huge smile. And then I heard it. It wasn't the sound of brakes. It was the roar of an engine being pushed way too hard, a sound that doesn't belong on a quiet neighborhood street. A flash of silver, a high-end sports car, blew right through the stop sign. It wasn't even a rolling stop. It was complete, contemptuous disregard. Time warped. I saw the car swerve at the last second, but it was too late. The sound of the impact was sickening. A dull, heavy thud that I felt in my bones. I saw Sarah's body thrown into the air, her green backpack flying in the other direction. She landed on the asphalt with a stillness that stopped my heart cold. For a split second, the silver car paused. I saw a silhouette behind the wheel, a young man's face, pale with shock. Our eyes met, just for a fraction of a second. Then he made a decision. The engine screamed again, and the car tore out of there, leaving a trail of black rubber on the road as it vanished around the corner. A hit and run. The world went silent. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I threw my car door open and ran to her. "Sarah! Oh God, Sarah!" She was conscious, but just barely. Her leg was twisted at an angle that was just wrong. Bruises were already starting to bloom on her skin. But the worst part was the look in her eyes, a mix of confusion, pain, and a terror that I, her father, her protector, couldn't do a single thing to stop. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical jargon. I just held her hand, whispering that it was going to be okay, a lie I desperately needed to believe myself. The hospital was worse. The sterile smell, the hushed, serious tones of the doctors, the endless waiting. The diagnosis was brutal. Multiple fractures in her left leg and pelvis, a severe concussion, and then the words you never want to hear: potential nerve damage. The doctors couldn't say for sure if she'd ever get full mobility back. They put this heavy cast on her leg, a stark white symbol of the violence that had just ripped through our lives. The physical injuries were horrifying, but the emotional trauma was a deeper, invisible wound. My vibrant, laughing daughter was now a pale, broken figure in a hospital bed, her eyes filled with a quiet pain I couldn't reach. That night, as I sat by her bedside listening to the steady beep of the monitors, the grief started to harden into something else. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was rage, a cold, focused rage aimed at the shadow in that silver car who did this and just drove away. The initial police response felt routine. An officer took my statement and got a few accounts from neighbors who heard the crash but didn't get a good look at the car. They promised to check traffic cameras, but their tone was pessimistic. "These things can be tough," the officer said. High-end car, probably long gone by now. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. It was the first sign that the system I'd always trusted was already failing us. 2 days later, the phone call came. Not the police. The caller ID was a private number. When I answered, a smooth, confident voice on the other end said, "Mr. Evans, my name is Arthur Sterling. I believe my son, Richard, was involved in an unfortunate incident concerning your daughter." There was zero apology in his voice, not a hint of remorse. It was the tone of a man handling an annoying business deal. Arthur Sterling. A quick search confirmed my worst fears. CEO of Sterling Holdings, a massive development corporation with its name on half the new buildings in the city. A guy whose power was the stuff of local legend. "First," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I want to assure you that we are prepared to handle all of your daughter's medical expenses. All of them. And, of course, provide a substantial settlement for her pain and suffering. Let's say a 7-figure sum. Enough to ensure she's comfortable for the rest of her life." My shock curdled right back into that cold rage. "Your son left my daughter bleeding in the street," I said, my voice dangerously low. "He didn't panic. He fled. That's a felony." I heard a short, humorless laugh. "Mrs. Evans, let me be frank. I have the finest lawyers in the country on retainer. Who knows, maybe my son even had diplomatic plates he was borrowing. The justice system, it can be very complex for people who don't understand how it works." It wasn't advice. It was a threat. He was telling me he owned the system, even floating the idea of diplomatic immunity to show he was above the law. "We're not interested in your money, Mr. Sterling," I said, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "We're interested in justice." The line went quiet for a beat. The fake friendly tone was gone, replaced by pure ice. "Justice is a very expensive word, Mrs. Evans, and you'll find I have much deeper pockets than you. I can own the judge. I can make this case disappear. Think about your daughter. A long, drawn-out legal battle will only add to her trauma. Take the money. It's the smart play." He hung up. I just stood there, shaking with a fury so profound I thought it might tear me apart. He didn't just admit his son was guilty, he flaunted it. He used his power and wealth like a weapon. He called his son a good boy who panicked, but his actions screamed the truth. They were a family who believed accountability was for other people, the Untouchables, and he had just drawn a line in the sand. He thought he was scaring a grieving mother. He had no idea he'd just declared war on a woman with nothing left to lose. The CEO's call was just the beginning. In the days that followed, the walls started closing in. It was subtle at first, a series of frustrating dead ends that, on their own, seemed like bad luck. But when you put them all together, they painted a chilling picture of a cover-up in full swing. I called the detective on Sarah's case for an update. His whole tone had changed. He was evasive, distant. "We're looking into all leads, Mrs. Evans," he said, but the conviction was gone. I asked about the traffic camera, just a block from the accident. "Unfortunately," he said, "that camera was malfunctioning on the day of the incident. A real stroke of bad luck." A stroke of bad luck. The words bounced around in my head. Then the witnesses. The elderly couple who heard the crash? Suddenly, they didn't want to get involved. "Our memory isn't what it used to be," the husband told me, his voice strained. The teenager who saw a silver car speeding away? His parents called and said he was mistaken about the color and they didn't want him hounded by this. People were being reached. Intimidated. It was a classic rich man's tactic. Isolate the victim, discredit the evidence, and starve the investigation until it dies. The final blow came about a week later. The police department issued a preliminary report. It described the incident as a collision with a vehicle of unknown make and model. It mentioned a lack of credible witnesses and no viable surveillance footage. My statement, the description of the silver sports car, the young driver, it was all in there, but buried under so much jargon that it sounded useless. The report basically closed a book before it was even really opened. I sat at my kitchen table, that flimsy report in my hands, and felt a wave of true powerlessness wash over me. It's one thing to be wronged by a reckless kid. It's another thing entirely to be wronged by the very system that's supposed to protect you. Arthur Sterling had kept his promise. He was making the case disappear. He was a puppeteer, pulling strings in the police department, in the community, creating a new reality where his son was a ghost. In the world he was building, my daughter's pain didn't matter. The truth was irrelevant. Justice was a commodity he could afford and I couldn't. He thought he had one. He thought I'd crumble, take his blood money, and just fade away. That was his mistake. That feeling of absolute helplessness, it doesn't always lead to surrender. Sometimes it burns away everything but a single, hard, unbreakable core of resolve. Sitting there in the quiet of my house, with the sound of Sarah's labored breathing coming from her room, I knew the official channels were useless. The system was bought. If I wanted justice, I couldn't get it by knocking on doors. I'd have to kick them down. The cover-up wasn't the end. It was the beginning of my real fight. The next few days were the darkest. I'd spend hours just sitting by Sarah's bed, watching her chest slowly rise and fall. She was in and out of sleep, often waking up with a gasp from a nightmare she couldn't explain. That cast on her leg was a constant, glaring reminder. She barely spoke. The vibrant, chatty girl I knew had retreated deep inside herself, lost in a fog of pain and trauma. One afternoon, I was helping her with a glass of water when her eyes, cloudy with meds, focused on me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It hurts." 3 simple words, and they shattered what was left of my composure. She wasn't just talking about the physical pain. It was the injustice of it all, the fear, knowing that someone had hurt her and just drove away. I held her hand, feeling its warmth against the cold dread in my own chest. "I know, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick. "I know." Later that night, long after she'd fallen into a restless sleep, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. Each light a life, a story. And somewhere out there, in a mansion built on power and money, were Arthur Sterling and his son, Richard. They were probably sleeping soundly, confident their problem had been solved, that the little girl in the hospital and her mom were just a minor inconvenience, now swept under the rug. They saw me as a victim, and for a little while I was a victim of their recklessness, their arrogance, their corruption. But as I stood there, all that discipline from my years in the service started to kick in. In the service, you don't give up because you're outgunned. You change the rules of engagement. You don't fight their war, you make them fight yours. This wasn't a matter for a system I couldn't trust anymore. This was a mission. My objective was simple: expose Arthur and Richard Sterling for who they really were. My strategy? They had money and crooked officials. I would have the truth, patience, and the element of surprise. I looked back at Sarah sleeping. Her face, even in sleep, was marked with a pain no child should ever know. And in that moment I made a silent vow. This wasn't about hot-headed revenge. This was a cold, calculated commitment. I would not rest until the world knew their names. I wouldn't stop until the name Sterling was synonymous, not with wealth, but with cowardice and corruption. I would take everything from them: their reputation, their company, their freedom. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was an investigator, an advocate, and an enemy they never saw coming. The grief was still there, a permanent ache in my soul. But now it had a purpose. It was fuel for the fire I was about to build. A fire that would burn their untouchable world to the ground. The first step on any mission is gathering intel and resources. I knew I couldn't do this alone. Rage is a powerful fuel, but I needed tools and expertise from people who operated outside the crooked system. My training taught me to find the right person for the right job. This was no different. My first call was to a name from an old service buddy, a lawyer named David Chin. David wasn't some slick corporate attorney. His office was a cluttered walk-up above a bookstore that smelled like old paper and strong coffee. He was in his late 50s. His face looked tired, like he'd seen too much, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. He had a reputation as a bulldog, a guy who took on the cases the big firms wouldn't touch. The messy ones, the David versus Goliath fights. I told him everything. The hit and run, Sarah's injuries, the call from Sterling, the police cover-up. I handed him the dismissive police report. He read it slowly, his face giving nothing away. When he finished, he looked at me. "They think they've buried this," he said in a low grumble. "They've run the rich man's playbook. Intimidate, pay off, and erase. They expect you to sue for a settlement and sign a gag order. They're not expecting a real fight." "I'm not here for a settlement, David," I said. "I'm here for a reckoning." A slow smile spread across his face. "Good," he said. "That's the kind of case I like." David's first piece of advice was critical. The criminal case is dead in the water for now, but civil court is a different animal. We'll file a civil suit. The burden of proof is lower, and more importantly, it gives us the power of discovery. We can subpoena records, depose witnesses under oath, and force the Sterlings to answer questions they'd rather ignore. It's our crowbar to pry open their sealed-off world. Next, we needed an investigator. David knew the perfect person, a woman named Maria Flores. Maria was a former investigative journalist who got pushed out of the business for digging too deep. Now she ran her own PI firm. She was sharp, cynical, and had sources in every dark corner of the city. I met with her and David in his office. Maria listened to my story, her eyes narrowed. "So, a silver sports car, high-end, driven by a kid," she summarized. "The cops can't find it. What a shock. Sterling probably had it chopped for parts within hours." "Maybe," I said, "but Richard Sterling is arrogant. His father is arrogant. They think they're invincible. My gut says they didn't get rid of it. They hid it." Maria nodded, a glint in her eye. "I like your gut. Arrogance creates blind spots. They made a mistake somewhere. They always do." While Maria got to work, I started my own dig. I became obsessed. I spent hours online, learning everything about hit-and-run investigations. I learned that modern luxury cars are basically rolling computers. They have black boxes that record speed, braking, impact data. If we could find that car, we could find the truth. I went back to the scene of the accident. I walked the street block by block, looking for anything the police missed. I talked to every shop owner, every resident, asking about private security cameras. It was mostly dead ends, but then I found it. A small bank, 2 blocks down, had a camera pointed right at the street. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. This was basic police work that should have been done on day one. I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was part of a team. David was my strategist, Maria was my soldier on the ground, and I was the intel officer. We were building an arsenal not of weapons, but of facts. Each fact was a bullet, and we were loading our magazines, getting ready for the moment we finally had the Sterlings in our sights. They had an army of lawyers and crooked cops. We had a bulldog attorney, a renegade PI, and a mother's unbreakable will. For the first time since that horrible day, I felt a flicker of hope. The fight was on. For 2 weeks, the investigation felt like punching smoke. Maria chased down leads that just vanished. David filed the civil suit, and Sterling's legal team immediately buried us in motions to dismiss. It was a war of attrition meant to bleed us dry, but we held the line. The first crack in their fortress came from Maria. She'd been methodically tracking Richard Sterling's movements, pulling social media, credit card statements, and cell tower data we'd gotten through the lawsuit. She found what she was looking for in a series of text messages. "He's a stupid kid," she said, sliding a folder across David's desk to me. A rich, stupid kid. The day after the accident, a friend texts him asking why he wasn't at a party. Richard replies, laying low, "Had some car trouble." Car trouble. It was the break we needed. Maria dug deeper, focusing on that phrase. She cross-referenced cell tower data with every high-end body shop in a 50-mile radius that specialized in foreign sports cars and, more importantly, was known for being discreet. It took another week, but she found it. A boutique shop in an industrial park an hour away called Prestige Restorations. The owner was cagey, but Maria has a way of making people talk. She found out Richard Sterling brought in a silver sports car, the exact model I described for minor front-end repair. He paid a huge amount in cash and told the owner to keep it off the books. The owner, scared of legal trouble, admitted something else. Richard had been texting him nonstop, nervously asking for updates. Maria used some legal magic and got a copy of those messages. They were a gold mine. "Is the dent out yet?" one read. Another, even worse, said, "You need to replace the whole front quarter panel. No bondo. I don't want any trace of the damage." It was a clear-cut attempt to destroy evidence. While Maria was closing in on the car, I was chasing my own lead, the bank camera. After weeks of David fighting with the bank's lawyers, they finally handed over the footage. We sat in his office, watching the grainy, time-stamped video. And there it was. 2 minutes after the crash, a silver sports car rockets through the frame, going way too fast. The video wasn't clear enough to see the driver, but as it passed under a streetlight, the camera caught a perfect, undeniable image of the license plate. I felt the air leave my lungs. David leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Checkmate," he whispered. We ran the plate. It wasn't registered to Richard or Arthur Sterling. It was registered to a shell corporation that, after a little digging, was traced directly back to the headquarters of Sterling Holdings. They tried to hide it, but they got lazy. We now had the car, the plate, and text messages proving Richard tried to cover it all up. We had a direct link to his father's company. The wall of smoke was clearing, and for the first time, we could see the structure of their lies. It was big, but it wasn't unbreakable. We had found the cracks. Now, we just had to apply pressure until the whole damn thing came crashing down. Having the evidence was one thing. Knowing how to use it was something else entirely. Arthur Sterling had already bragged about how he could manipulate the system. We couldn't just walk our evidence into the local police station. For all we knew, the detective we spoke to would just make another phone call, and our folder would end up in a shredder. This was where David's experience paid off. Sterling's greatest strength is his local influence, David explained. pacing his office. He's got the local cops and judges in his pocket, or at least he thinks he does. So we don't play on his home field. We go over their heads. Our investigation pivoted. It wasn't just about a hit and run anymore. It was about the cover-up and the corruption that made it possible. Maria started digging into Arthur Sterling himself, pulling property records, campaign donations, business contracts. A pattern started to emerge. Sterling was a master of quiet corruption. He didn't use bags of cash. He tangled people up in a web of favors and obligations. She found that the first judge assigned to our civil case, the one who'd been stalling everything, had a brother whose construction company got a suspiciously large contract from Sterling Holdings a few years back. A clear conflict of interest. We filed a motion to have him recused. He stepped down immediately, a small victory that showed the Sterlings we were watching their every move. Then Maria found the big one. She found a source, a disgruntled former executive at Sterling Holdings willing to talk anonymously. He told us about a discretionary fund Arthur Sterling controlled, a slush fund. He explained how Sterling used it to make donations to police charities or sponsor lavish trips for city officials, all disguised as fact-finding missions. It was just legal enough to look clean, but it created a deep-seated culture of IOU. The source confirmed our darkest suspicions. He told Maria he'd overheard Sterling on the phone after the accident, bragging to another executive. The words he repeated sent a chill down my spine. "Don't worry about the police," Sterling had said. "I've got the chief on a short leash. And as for the judge, I'll own him by the time this is over." This was it. The conspiracy. A direct confirmation of the threat he'd made to me on the phone. We had him, in his own words, admitting he planned to obstruct justice. The hit and run was the son's crime, but the cover-up, the intimidation, the web of corruption, that was all the father. This changed everything. Our case wasn't just a personal injury claim anymore. It had blossomed into a full-blown public corruption scandal just waiting to detonate. We realized that to get justice for Sarah, we had to expose the whole rotten system Sterling had built around himself. We couldn't just go after a limb, we had to go for the head. The evidence we held was more than a legal tool. It was a bomb aimed at the heart of Sterling's empire, and we were about to decide exactly when and where to set off. With the evidence locked down, the video, the plate, the texts, the whistleblower, we had the ammunition. Now we needed a battle plan. David, Maria, and I gathered in David's office, which now looked more like a war room. A whiteboard was covered in a spider web of names, dates, and connections charting the Sterling's crimes. "If we just dump all of this at once," David said, pointing a pen at the board, "their army of lawyers will bury us in motions. They'll call it a smear campaign, a money grab. They'll control the narrative. We can't let that happen. We have to control it. Our plan had to be surgical. We had to hit them from every direction at once, overwhelming them before they could even think about a defense. We spent 2 days refining the attack. First, the media. We wouldn't go to just any reporter. Maria knew the perfect person, a veteran investigative journalist named Ben Carter, who had a popular weekly segment on a national network. Carter was famous for taking down corporate and political crooks. We'd give him the whole story as an exclusive. The video, the texts, the evidence of corruption. We would let him light the fuse, and the public outrage would be our air cover. Second, the legal shockwave. The day after Carter's story aired, David would hit them twice. He'd file a formal complaint with the state's Judicial Conduct Board against the first judge. That would send a message through the courthouse that we weren't afraid to call out corruption. More importantly, he'd take our criminal evidence not to the local DA, but straight to the state attorney general's office, arguing the local office was too compromised to run a fair investigation. We demand a special prosecutor, taking the case completely out of Sterling's sphere of influence. Third, the corporate assault. While all that was happening, I had my own job. I'd launch a targeted social media campaign. Not an angry rant, but a calm, factual telling of our story. I created a website, justiceforsarah.com. It would have a timeline, documents, and updates on Sarah's recovery. I would tell our story as a mother. This would humanize our fight, putting immense pressure on Sterling Holdings' board of directors and their business partners. A CEO caught in a hit-and-run cover-up is bad for business. Finally, we had to brace for the counterattack. We knew Sterling would fight dirty. He'd try to discredit me, paint me as unstable. He'd attack Maria and David. We had to be ready. David prepared for the inevitable defamation lawsuits. Maria did background checks on Sterling's lawyers, looking for weaknesses. I wrote down every single word Sterling had ever said to me, preparing for the character assassination I knew was coming. It was a high-risk plan. Everything had to be timed perfectly. If one part failed, the whole thing could collapse. But as I looked at the determined faces of David and Maria, I knew it was our only shot. We were no longer reacting to Sterling's moves. For the first time, we were on the attack. We were about to bring the war to his doorstep, and he wouldn't see it coming until his house was on fire. The Sunday night Ben Carter's segment aired felt like the longest night of my life. I sat on the couch, my phone on the table, a knot of anxiety twisting my gut. Sarah was asleep in her room, thankfully unaware of the storm we were about to unleash for her. Carter's introduction was chilling. Tonight, a story of power, corruption, and a mother's fight for justice. It involves one of the city's most powerful men, a hit-and-run that left a 14-year-old girl critically injured, and a cover-up that goes to the very heart of our justice system. For the next 15 minutes, the world saw what we'd found. Carter played the grainy footage of the silver sports car. He put Richard Sterling's texts up on the screen, highlighting the words, "Don't want any trace of the damage." He interviewed the anonymous executive, his voice disguised, who detailed the slush fund and Sterling's boast about having the police on a leash. He even showed a picture of me and Sarah from the week before the accident, a smiling mother and daughter in a world that no longer existed. The second the segment ended, my phone lit up. It was David. "It started," was all he said. The explosion was immediate and spectacular. On social media, #JusticeForSarah went viral within an hour. People were furious, sharing the clip, demanding action. The story was picked up by local news, then national outlets. The narrative was no longer something Sterling could control. We had set the terms. He wasn't a respected CEO anymore. He was a corrupt father who helped his son flee a crime scene. By Monday morning, it was everywhere. Reporters were camped outside Sterling Holdings, outside Sterling's mansion, even outside my house. I followed David's instructions and gave one calm statement. All we have ever wanted is for the person who did this to my daughter to be held accountable. The evidence speaks for itself. The public pressure was overwhelming. Calls for an independent investigation flooded the Attorney General's office. The local police department, so dismissive before, was forced to issue a statement that they were re-examining the case. But the best moment came Monday afternoon. I was refreshing the news when a new headline appeared. The Sterling Holdings Board of Directors had called an emergency meeting. The first domino had fallen, and it had fallen hard. The public knew the truth, and the sound of their collective anger was a roar that not even Arthur Sterling could ignore. The emergency board meeting was just the start of the corporate unraveling. The story Ben Carter broke wasn't just a personal scandal. It was a direct hit on the Sterling brand, which was built on a carefully crafted image of civic leadership. That image was now on fire. On Tuesday morning, the stock market opened, and the consequences became brutally clear. Sterling Holdings stock, a reliable performer for years, plummeted. It dropped 10% in the first hour, then 15%. Billions in value just vanished. Investors were panicking. The story was now about a CEO who used company resources to obstruct justice and whose toxic leadership was a catastrophic financial risk. The fallout was a cascade. A major university, which had a business school named after Arthur Sterling, announced it was reconsidering the naming rights. A national charity publicly asked for his resignation from their board. Corporate partners began issuing press releases to distance themselves from his company. The web of influence he'd spent a lifetime building was now working in reverse, strangling him. My little website, justiceforsarah.com, was getting millions of hits. Our story was resonating. I got thousands of messages of support, many from people who'd also been bullied by the powerful. Our fight had become a symbol for something much bigger. The pressure inside Sterling Holdings hit a boiling point. The board, facing a shareholder revolt and a brand in freefall, was forced to act. They were businessmen, and the bottom line was clear. Arthur Sterling was no longer an asset. He was a radioactive liability. On Wednesday afternoon, just 3 days after the story broke, the announcement came. Sterling Holdings released a single, terse paragraph. The board of directors has accepted Arthur Sterling's resignation as CEO and chairman, effective immediately. The company will cooperate fully with any and all official investigations. Accepted his resignation. That's corporate speak for we threw him out. I read the statement over and over. This was the man who had laughed at me on the phone. The man who told me justice was too expensive for me. He had been toppled, not by a rival or a bad market, but by a mother who refused to shut up. His empire, the source of his arrogance, had begun to crumble. And the best part? The justice system hadn't even started with him yet. With the court of public opinion having spoken, the official wheels of justice, once so stuck, started turning with surprising speed. The public outcry was just too loud to ignore. On Thursday, the state attorney general announced the appointment of a special prosecutor, citing the need to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. This was a huge victory. The case was now out of the hands of the local officials Sterling had compromised. The special prosecutor's team moved fast. They subpoenaed all our evidence. They authenticated everything. They took my formal deposition. They re-interviewed the witnesses who were now no longer afraid to talk. Less than 2 weeks later, the grand jury returned an indictment against Richard Sterling on multiple felony counts, including felony hit and run causing serious bodily injury and evidence tampering. The arrest warrant was issued that afternoon. There was no quiet phone call this time. In a move clearly made for the cameras, 2 state police cars rolled up to the gates of the Sterling mansion. News helicopters hovered overhead, broadcasting it all live. Richard Sterling, the Untouchable son, was walked from his home in handcuffs. He was wearing a designer hoodie, but his face was pale and terrified. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the dawning horror of a kid whose protective bubble had just burst for good. He was processed and booked like anyone else. The judge at his arraignment, a no-nonsense woman from another county, set bail high. Richard had to surrender his passport, wear a GPS ankle monitor, and was forbidden from driving. He was also hit with a restraining order, legally barring him from coming anywhere near me or my daughter. Watching the news report of his arraignment, seeing him stand before a judge, no longer a phantom in a car but a defendant in a criminal case, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a quiet, solemn sense of rightness. The scales of justice, so heavily weighted in his favor, were finally starting to balance. The law his father thought he could buy and sell was finally catching up. While his son was navigating the system he'd so arrogantly dismissed, Arthur Sterling's world continued to implode. His resignation wasn't the end of his troubles. It was just the end of the first chapter. The special prosecutor wasn't just looking at the hit and run. He had opened a second, broader investigation into obstruction of justice and conspiracy, with Arthur Sterling as the main target. Our whistleblower's testimony and Sterling's boastful phone calls were now the cornerstone of a major corruption probe. The threat he made to me that he could own the judge was no longer a private insult. It was key evidence in a criminal investigation against him. His network of influence turned into a liability. The city officials and cops who had enjoyed his favors were now facing internal investigations and subpoenas. The web he'd so carefully woven was being unraveled, and every single thread led back to him. Our civil suit was also moving forward. Facing a mountain of undeniable evidence, Sterling's lawyers approached us with a new offer. This time there was no arrogance. It was an offer of surrender. The settlement was substantial, enough to cover all of Sarah's current and future medical needs, therapy, everything. It would ensure she never had to worry about the financial consequences of that day for the rest of her life. We accepted, but we made it clear the money was for Sarah's care. Justice was happening in criminal court. Arthur Sterling, the man who once walked through the city like a king, was now a pariah. His name, once a symbol of success, was now a synonym for scandal. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed, and he was facing the very real possibility of joining his son as a criminal defendant. He tried to buy our silence for a few $1,000,000, and it ended up costing him everything: his company, his power, and his legacy. It was a quiet, humiliating, and complete downfall. Getting here was long and incredibly difficult. We succeeded because we refused to be intimidated, and because the truth, when you drag it into the light, is a powerful thing. But we also succeeded because when the story broke, people like you cared. You shared the story, demanded action, and you made it impossible for the powerful to hide. If you believe that no one should be above the law, please give this video a like and subscribe. More importantly, if you or someone you know has ever felt silenced or bullied by someone with power, share your story in the comments. Reading your messages gave my family strength, and creating a community where we can share our own fights is one of the most powerful things we can do. Let's remind each other that while a single voice can be ignored, a chorus of voices demanding justice is a force that can change the world. Today, our life is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. Sarah is a fighter. Her recovery is a long road, and some days are harder than others. She still has pain, and the scars, both the ones you can see and the ones you can't, are still there. But her laugh is starting to come back. That spark in her eyes is returning. Her resilience through all of this has been my constant inspiration. She is the true hero of this story. The legal battles are mostly over. Richard Sterling was convicted and is serving time. The message was sent loud and clear. Your money can't protect you from the consequences of your actions. As for Arthur Sterling, his legal troubles are ongoing, a slow, grinding process that has guaranteed he will never wield the kind of corrupt power again. We won, but it's a strange kind of victory. There's no parade. The Betrayal win isn't the prison sentence or the settlement. It's the quiet moments I have with my daughter now. It's watching her take a few painful steps in physical therapy, her face set with determination. It's knowing that we stood up to the darkness and refused to let it put out our light. They underestimated us. They saw a broken girl and a grieving mother. They didn't see a warrior with an unbreakable spirit and a mom who would move heaven and earth for her child. They thought their power made them untouchable. We proved that justice, real justice, can touch anyone.